Let's pick things up there for tonight's Dateline Defense. Joining me, Cedric Leighton. He's a military intelligence officer, retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Cedric, let's start with that last point. How should justice for sexual assault victims change the military?
Well, I think we have to be very sure, Morris, that what we do here in this particular case is protect all the victims that are there in the whole sexual abuse situation, because sexual abuse is one of those most personal of crimes, and anything that is related to that is something that we just cannot have. We cannot have sexual abuse occurring in the ranks of the military, and we need to make sure that each and every case of sexual abuse is thoroughly investigated, and that's the key difference in this particular situation when it comes to investigations and the ability of the military justice system to take care of any type of sexual assault crime.
Now, the U.S. has been engaged in warfare for 12 straight years. What role does perpetual combat play in this overall issue?
Well, I think that's something that we haven't quite determined yet. Perpetual combat is something that the U.S. military hasn't really had since the Vietnam era, and each and every instance of combat is obviously going to be different. Each and every instance is going to take with it the psychology, a psychological toll as well as a physical toll on the members that are actually performing duties in war zones. So it is entirely conceivable that combat has had a major impact on the psyche of the military, and it has an ability also created a difference in the way in which we work within the military, and that is something that is very unfortunate, because obviously in the case of the sexual assaults that we're dealing with, it hasn't protected people that have fallen victims to sexual perpetrators.
Cedric, your career has spanned the generations. Is it more of a problem now than it was years ago, or are we just getting more reports of it?
We're getting more reports of it. There has always been sexual assault in the military, and it's very unfortunate, and it really depends on the command climate that we institute within the military. So it's incumbent upon commanders to make it very clear that they're not part of a good old boy network or any other protective society. It becomes very, very clear that they have to do a very clear and concise job in making sure that sexual assault is a crime that is going to be prosecuted. They have to be very sure that they take that crime very, very seriously, and that they also make sure that their subordinates know that they can come to them with any type of sexual assault problem or any other issue that is detrimental to the morale and their performance in terms of their duties.
Moving on to other news, President Obama is also dealing with the political firestorm over his administration's handling of last September's deadly attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Today, he asked lawmakers to increase funding for diplomatic security. Here are some specifics. $1.4 billion for increased security. The money would come from funds not spent in Iraq. It would be spent on 35 more Marine security guard units, 155 diplomatic security agents, security upgrades, and new construction. Cedric, you've spent a lot of time overseas at some of these facilities. All politics aside, will increased funding help?
Well, it's part of the solution, Morris, but it's not the entire solution. The basic idea that they really need to focus on is how are they going to protect embassies and diplomatic facilities like the one in Benghazi from attacks of the type that we had there on September 11th of 2012. And the key here is to have the requisite military forces in place that can actually perform duties of extracting personnel or preventing this type of event from occurring. That is not really being addressed in these budgetary issues, and each proposal talks about strengthening local defenses, which is important, but it's not the whole picture.
Now, you're also following a new information about America's Witness Protection Program. The Justice Department says Wit-Sec failed to share a few names with the Terrorist Screening Center, and those people were allowed to travel on commercial flights. Bring us up to date.
Well, basically, Morris, Wit-Sec is designed to protect witnesses that have testified against organized crime figures or against terrorist figures, and there are a very few participants in the Wit-Sec program. Currently, the Wit-Sec program has about 700 participants in it. They are given identities with other names, with other data that is supposed to protect them from people who would seek to harm them. So what has happened is some of the people that have been involved in the Wit-Sec program have actually testified against terrorist figures or provided other assistance for our efforts to go after terrorist figures. And these particular individuals may have also been part of the terrorist watch list in their true names. So those true names were not then transferred into the false names that they were given by the Witness Protection Program. And because of that, they slipped through the cracks and were in fact able to fly on commercial airliners. So what that means is that people with terrorist ties were allowed to fly on commercial aircraft. That clearly at this point in time didn't affect the safety of the traveling public, but what it did do is it showed that there were weaknesses in the information sharing apparatus between the FBI, the TSA, the Justice Department, and other entities that are really set to preserve our integrity in terms of the data that we have to work the no-fly list. And that becomes a key issue in terms of information sharing and our ability to also make sure that that list is an accurate list.
Quite a story. We're going to stay on top of this. Thanks for bringing it to light this evening. Colonel Cedric Leighton, president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Thanks, Cedric.
You bet, Morris. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, let's